Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Monday, January 13th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We got to talk about that game that happened on Friday. Ohio State wins the Cotton Bowl in very dramatic fashion. Jack Sawyer gets his moment in the sun, and we'll talk about it all in the first segment. Then we'll get into a little talk around where Texas goes from here. Obviously, the Arch Manning era has started over there in Austin, but still a lot of questions that you have to answer as you go into 2025. Then we'll take a little bit of an early look at that national title game. Ohio State, Notre Dame, going to be a really fun matchup between two teams that have dealt with a lot this year. A couple of losses that they did not expect to take, and they were able to battle through them. Then we'll get into a couple of overreactions from this past weekend, a couple that I'm all the way on board with, a couple that I'm not necessarily all the way on board with, but definitely are things to think about as we head into the championship and really into the offseason. And then we'll do a little bit of a weekend update. We'll get into all of the different things happening around the sport. Miami gets a quarterback and a defensive coordinator, and we'll talk about both of them at the end of the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that and we can have a little fun back and forth here. But let's go ahead and get into this, and let's talk about first that Cotton Bowl that did happen on Friday. Obviously, we had the show Friday, got ready for that game, and I had said I had a feeling that there was going to be an incredible game. I had a feeling that it was going to absolutely deliver, and it very much did it. It very much did. It was 2 minutes left. Texas was on the goal line with about down 7 with about 2 minutes left, and then the play that happened that everyone around Columbus will remember forever. Jack Sawyer gets a fumble, for 83 yards and a touchdown, and Ohio State gets the win, moves on to the national title, and there's a lot of different things to kind of unpack here. Obviously, this game opened up, and it looked like it might have been all Ohio State. Texas gets a turnover on downs on their first offensive possession. Then Ohio State comes down on the 10-play drive, scores a touchdown. You're thinking, okay, maybe they might be able to control this game, kind of handle it. Then the Texas defense really set their feet, got 8 straight punts by both teams, and then Texas was able to break through with a big-time score to Jaden Blue with that first touchdown. They obviously got 2 touchdowns to Jaden Blue on essentially the same play call. Great play call both times by Steve Sarkisian, but great kind of getting them back in the game. Felt like they were on their road to possibly getting back in this game, tying it going into halftime, really in a good position. And then TreVeyon Henderson takes one to the house, 75 yards on a screen. It was definitely one of those that I think Pete Kwiatkowski definitely wants that play back. It's one of those that blitzed about 5 guys on that play, missed TreVeyon Henderson, and he went to the house. One of those guys that can totally change the game, and he definitely did on that play. But Texas was able to kind of open the second half with a pair of punts and then scored a long touchdown drive, tied it up at 14. And then things got a little bit wild. Ohio State went on a 13-play, 88-yard, 7-minute, 45-second touchdown drive, had multiple third-down conversions from Will Howard, had a fourth-down conversion from Will Howard that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but remarkable drive for them. Texas marches down the field, and then they have the goal line stand that a lot of people remember forever. But this defensive line really did eat Quinn Ewers up for a lot of the day. And some of it was Quinn Ewers putting himself in bad spots. You know, pocket management, pocket presence has been a big-time issue for Quinn Ewers really throughout his career. It was a big-time issue on Friday, no doubt about that. And the offensive line didn't necessarily help him out too much. Ohio State had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 58 rushing yards allowed. And if you want to take out Quinn Ewers' sack yards just for fun, 76 yards on 24 carries is not exactly a good day at the office for your run game. So it was the issues that had plagued Texas really all season. It was the power run game. It was the ability to score when you get into the red area. And it was some of the pocket presence issues that Quinn Ewers has had throughout his career that definitely reared its ugly head in this game. But really, it's this moment, right? Everyone in Ohio State is going to remember this moment. Jack Sawyer is definitely going to remember this moment for a very long time. He makes the play that a lot of people will be talking about for a very long time around Columbus, and now they move on. And the question is, will this play be the moment, or will it be one of the moments? Because the reality is, everyone has one of these moments on a national championship run. You know, everyone has that one big-time catch, that one big-time block, that one big-time whatever that puts you in the national title, that puts you in a position to possibly win a national title. you still got to finish the job, obviously, and that definitely something to think about. But I did want to talk about the second and goal call that a lot of people are going around talking about with Steve Sarkisian. The toss to Trey Wisner that definitely got eaten up in a lot of different ways by Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom, but I do understand it. It's definitely not necessarily the greatest of calls, definitely something that I probably would have just run up the middle a couple of different times to see what you get on the first couple of first couple of downs, and then kind of find yourself on third down. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where if it works and Kelvin Banks hits his block against Lathan Ransom, Trey Wisner might walk into the end zone, and then you have a totally different conversation. So it's definitely a missed moment. There's no doubt about that, and definitely one that Steve Sarkisian will be thinking about for quite some time. But I don't know. It's one of those calls that I think a lot of people will tear to pieces, and it's one that if it works, we're probably not thinking about it too much. And as for why Arch didn't come in there, because I think that's another conversation going around. From my point of view, I haven't heard this said, so it's not necessarily, totally accurate or totally 100%, but it did not look like Arch Manning was 100% after that first run that he took. Looked like he took a little bit of a hit to the head. Definitely was something that he wasn't holding his helmet on the sideline for the majority of the back half of that game. I don't think he was eligible to come in that moment, much less was he going to in a goal line type situation. So I think that's the answer there. Definitely something that Sark is going to be asked about, and definitely something that hopefully he'll definitely change a little bit going forward. But overall, remarkable game from this Ohio State defense. They were all over the place. Remarkable game from the Texas defense in a lot of different ways. But Ohio State made what I like to call the championship plays in a lot of they made there were two kind of huge moments in this game as far as I'm concerned, and there were two moments where Ohio State just kind of won the day. It was obviously the TreVeyon Henderson play, and then the third down play that really, the fourth down play that obviously Jack Sawyer takes back to the house. But there were other moments, the third down conversions from Will Howard that were absolutely huge. G. Scott having a huge third down play where he could have gotten 3 yards on it on 3rd and 8, set up a 4th and 5. He ends up getting 6 yards and sets up a 4th and 2. Will Howard's able to run, does trip before he gets to the end zone, but at the end of the day, remarkable stuff from this team. And then every time that Texas felt like they were knocking on the door, like they might be able to take over this game, Ohio State had an answer, and it was really, really remarkable to watch. But overall, I think this was a really necessary win for Ohio State. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't necessarily, you get up by 34 points and you kind of just sit on the ball the rest of the game. They had to battle in this one for the entirety of the game, really, until that Jack Sawyer touchdown happened. It was a very close game that Texas very well could have won, but Ohio State made the couple of plays. Will Howard made some winning plays. The D-line owned the day in a lot of different ways, and when they needed big plays, Caleb Downs, Jack Sawyer, TreVeyon Henderson, Lathan Ransom, all of these guys stepped up in a huge way and put them in a position to win this game, put them in a position to make that 1 or 2 plays that made a difference in this game. I knew it was going to be a crazy one. It absolutely was, and Jack Sawyer was the one that made the final play to really send them to the national title. Definitely going to be a play that they talk about for a very long time around Columbus. But how Ohio State won this game, the D-line disruption was very real. Pretty much the entirety of the game, they controlled the offensive line of scrimmage, and definitely was something that Texas was a little bit worried about going into this game. Now, Texas did an okay job in pass pro for different points during this game. Obviously, some of the sacks were Quinn Ewers' fault. Some of the sacks were just misses on the especially right side of that offensive line. Something to think about, and something we'll talk about here in the next segment. But overall, 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 3 yards per RB rush in this game for Texas. It was absolute domination. It's something that Texas really struggled with, really against any elite defensive line throughout the year, and it was definitely something they struggled with on Friday. And then championship plays. This is not something that's going to be a stat, and it's not something that you're going to see on the sheet very much. But the reality is, Caleb Downs saved a touchdown in the second drive for Texas, where Ryan Wingo, if he gets past him, he is gone, and he's there. Texas goes up, and it's definitely a different conversation going forward. And then G. Scott set up a better 4th down, an absolutely huge play where it looked like Jahdae Barron might have him down for a 3-yard gain. He ends up getting a 6-yard gain and sets up a 4th down. And then obviously those 2 big time plays on the goal line, obviously huge plays, but remarkable just little plays throughout this game that put them in better positions to win. And obviously they were one of those teams that has all the guys to make those plays, and they really showed up in this game. And then finally, elite tackling. They were all over the place, and it was one of those teams, obviously like Texas is, that if you miss a couple of tackles, they will make you pay and they will score a ton of points on you. But Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, and all the guys on the back end just came downhill and made play after play after play. Caleb Downs especially, Lathan Ransom made some huge plays. Davison Igbinosin, another one that made some big plays. So overall, it was absolutely huge because you know what this Texas team can do. You know the speed that they have, and you miss a couple of tackles, everything can change in a game, but they didn't miss those couple of tackles. If he misses that Ryan Wingo tackle, it's an entirely different game with an entire different story and a lot of different things that Ohio State just won the margins in this game when they very badly had to. But obviously, Ohio State had a game where not everything clicked, where everything kind of went a little bit awry. Jeremiah Smith only had 1 catch for 3 yards. It was definitely a game where it wasn't as pretty as the one that you felt like you had the first couple of games, but it's one that you're going to need. There's no doubt about it, especially playing a team like Notre Dame, and we'll talk about that here in a second, where it's going to be a different defense that they're going to face and might be a little bit more advantageous for them, but something we'll talk about here in a second when we get into the little preview for that game. But remarkable from Ohio State, remarkable from all these players, and the 2 guys that made the biggest plays of the day were Travion Henderson and were Jack Sawyer. The 2 guys that came back to school, did not have to, definitely could have been drafted last year, but decided to come back to Ohio State. They make the plays that move them on to the championship game, and Texas we'll have a chance to talk about them here in a second. But yet another game that ends a couple of yards away from a national title berth, another game that is a little bit tough to swallow. Obviously, very optimistic about what the future holds, and we'll talk about that in the next segment. But definitely one that they're going to remember for quite some time, and especially that pitch call on second and goal is definitely one that they're going to remember for a while around there in Austin, and hopefully they can right the ship in 2025, and that's actually what we'll talk about here in this next segment. We'll get into Texas, and we'll talk about just where do they go from here. You know, what are they losing going into this offseason? Obviously, a lot of different people walking out the door. The Arch Manning era begins, and a lot of different stuff to talk about with Texas, and we'll do it all right after this, so stick with us.